it can change your life. So, yeah. So, to that tune, whenever I got that crazy call last Friday that said, guess who's in trouble, and guess who's not going to give us this money, and guess all of these things, and I was just like, you know what? This is the perfect opportunity for me to bring some truth and some reality from somebody that really gets it and knows this business inside out. So you guys are in for such an amazing treat. You can't even find anyone else that's been in the cannabis business this long. I challenge you. But without further ado, I would like to introduce to you the leader of Washington State Enterprises, and his name is Clayton Turner, and we are privileged to have him lead today's session.
Hey everyone, I'm just going to grab my notes here really quick, and if we can find the remote, then it was up here, but I'd like to switch this over on the AD. It was right. How's everyone doing tonight? Woo! I want to give you guys some overview, a little bit about what we're going to be going over, and hopefully some of this is going to be relevant. Can everyone hear me okay in the back? Is it all good back there? All right, cool. So a little bit about what we're going to be going over today is some pitfalls, because whenever I go to a state that's emerging, they run into some issues. And I honestly know from experience, having gone to school in Corpus Christi, Texas at St. Patrick's, and down at Cock Elementary and living on Ocean Drive down there, that you do not mess with Texas. It was very much into my head by Spuds McKenzie and others. So I knew better than to do that. And so my goal here is to help you guys get an idea of all the mistakes that other states have made that aren't as friendly to industry or don't understand industry as well. And they did the best shot they could in an industry that no one's ever done this before in. But there's a lot of things to look at, such as what your soil content is, what type of soil you have, what you've done in the area before, such as grow cotton or other things. There's other pitfalls states run into, such as drying. You know, you got all this wet material, and depending on what part of the state you're in, it can mold. So you have issues with that to ruin product. You know, there's a whole stack and slew of problems you can run into, and the biggest thing I'm going to help you with tonight, the biggest thing I think I can get through is a general idea that you are going to bottleneck if you don't address THC. Because while we have a cannabis venture, you know, thing up here, which is amazing, I love cannabis, honestly. The issue is that you can't sell your product if you condense it. So I'm going to give you a little example here. You get a 0.03% plant, right? It's a great plant. You're psyched about it. It's all legal. It's good. I can sell it wherever I want. You can sell it in the store and smoke. It's awesome. But when you condense it into a crude oil and you bring your CBD up to 50%, that means you also increased your THC by a degree of 5. Now it's unsellable. So you go, oh, I'm going to make distillate. That'll do it. And unfortunately, once you get to distillate, then you've increased it another 4 times or so. So that's a real problem. So the biggest thing I can help you guys with tonight is the idea that you can actually pull out whatever cannabinoids, not just THC, because CBN, if you ask around, in some circles can go for as much as $60,000 a kilo if it's the right stuff in the right percentage. So those novel cannabinoids, the other cannabinoids, the CBG that a lot of people are already on producing, can actually be isolated out of the plant with one system, one process, one SOP. You don't need to change it up, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel. This stuff's actually already been going on for 30 years, just not so much here. So our companies are Rainier Distillers, where we started. We started as a, let's go ahead and go to the next slide here. You can see up here, this is the Wayback Machine. Any of you guys can look it up. We started back in 2010 as a small craft brewing and essential oil terpene extraction company. See, in brewing, when you drink a beer, and while there's some debate on mass spectrometry and what makes up the terpenes, humulene is humulene and it's in beer too. So beer and hops share a lot of the same components to give flavor to your alcohol that, that cannabis or hemp does. So we were actually working on that and how to extract those and isolate them, years ago. So eventually, the cannabis medical market evolved, and Rainier Distillers created a replacement for the rotary evaporator that we called the Weed Witch. It's right over here. This little guy, back when we were in the rotary evaporator days, 4 or 5 years ago, you'd have a glass rotary evaporator. Has anyone in here actually used one? Can you raise your hand? Has anyone worked with a glass short path or any of that and had to clean one? I'm telling you, when you work with glass in the lab, it is the worst thing in the world because you're cleaning it, you're shaking it, you have breakage, you have lost product, and we thought we're trying to pump heat through an insulator. That seems foolish. We've been making stills for a long time and they're all metal. None of them are glass. Why would you do that? So we made a stainless 304 steel food grade unit that could evaporate faster than a rotary evaporator and would be perfect for the cannabis market to do about 100 pounds a day, which back then, 5 years ago, was very reasonable because your pricing on it was right around 11 grand. So that was a good deal. You got a unit, you get your business started, you have a little bit of centrifusion for that, some filtration, and you've got a crude RSO that you can give to people, put in gummy bears. If you do it right, you can even dab it. So, that's essentially the first product that we came into our company with was the Weed Witch. That's our IP. We've had it for years. It's a multi-function unit, actually. When we were working on it, we added a thermostat, temperature control, it had a double boiler, and it could make 180 proof ethanol under the TTB, which is a permitting process that lets you make your own ethanol as long as you don't sell it. It's part of a greening initiative. And you can run this unit under vacuum if you augmented it. You could use it for finishing and decarboxylation. If you don't heat your product and you just make CO2 without heating it, you eat that product, it's no good. It won't do anything for you. Won't benefit you. So basically, this unit can even distill water and extract terpenes all in one unit. We wanted a universal solution. That's what we've always been hunting for with our business, is how do we just solve all this junk so our clients don't have to worry? And we found out people needed other solutions. They needed a clean out pump because this thing's hot, it's hard to get into. So then we had to start working with vacuums. Let's pump this thing out, let's make it easier. Then we added feeder tanks, conical lids, and extensions for higher proof ethanol production. Next slide. But then we got asked, can we make distillate out of this crude? Because now we don't want crude so much anymore. Now we want distillate. So can your unit do that? And that wasn't necessarily my background. So I got a hold of both what you'd call up in the Northwest backyard blasters. They're home chemists who really know their stuff when it comes to cannabis, but I test and I verify, just like when I bring equipment in and go to the factory. So then I hired biochemical engineers, and I took a big hit because they cost me a lot of money. But they came in from the University of Washington, and they started looking at what my backyard blasters were doing. And they're going, this is ingenious for a dude that just figured this out his damn self on a web message board. This is great. But if we added this, this, and this, we could tweak this process and we could make it massively more efficient. And that's when my mechanical engineers got involved, and they agreed. They said, yes, we can implement this, and actually, it already exists in parallel industry. People have been doing this for a long time. So let's take what the biochemists know, and let's take what the mechanical engineer knows, and let's make what the backyard blaster's making, but on a much bigger scale, much cleaner, ISO 9000 and GMP. So that was our goal when we got asked if we could make distillate. So we had to go find out, and we implemented that process. Our company was growing, and we'd made many amazing industry connections. We started in a shack with about 5,000 bucks. That's when I started this company. And if you know about starting in a garage in the Northwest with no money, or on that area of the West Coast, it sometimes every once in a while works out pretty good. We owned our IP, and we got it rolling, and we self-financed ourselves the whole way. The people we were renting from, they had an international shipping business, and they fabricated infrared heaters. They had 39 patents on in-wall infrared heaters that destroy mold. They purified. They were doing all the ozone for the West End to get rid of smoking room scents and things like that. They dealt with filtration. And they had engineers fluent in Mandarin and technicians in-house and importers who all spoke Mandarin. In fact, our lead engineer was married to someone who was a Taiwanese-Chinese dual citizen. So when I go over there, we have a wooden chip. We sign products like we're Chinese. We get SGS insurance. We get government protection. It's wonderful. And I don't have to mark up everything because it's all in-house from our already established shipping company, and we had the whole chain. So we had their engineers start looking at what we were doing. And they said, oh my God, you're way more money than heaters. I mean, heaters are great, and they had great distribution. They had, I believe they had distribution through Ace Power, or not Ace Power, but through Ace at the time, hardware stores. And so basically, we realized that together, we could scale way beyond 50 to 100 pounds a day, and that's what we've been targeting before for recreational marijuana and so on. And that was the beginning of Washington State Enterprises. We soon added cryogenic freezers, filters, liquid-to-liquid filters, cartridge fillers, nanosonic emulsifiers for lotions and drinks, centrifuges, short paths, and more. In short, instead of offering our customers a still, we could now offer them an entire lab. We got word about a year beforehand when this all went down that they were pretty darn sure it was going to happen, that we would legalize hemp nationwide. And then we started grinding really hard on that idea because we started to do some math. I looked at the Oregon recreational market, and if you're familiar with there, I know some folks are invested up there, and if you look at the cannabis recreational market up there, they got something like a 4-year oversupply of plant material, right? So they've got all this plant material, all these issues, and we thought, oh man, because when you go up there, it's weird. A cartridge, look at it on Leafly, a cartridge for vape is still 30 bucks. Really high-end terp sauce, man, it goes for 45 to 80 bucks. How is that? They got 4 years supply. Well, it's because if the farmers don't set up their system right, it's the processors and the dispensaries that make the money. So full integration is really important, and good partnerships between the processors and the farmers and your distribution and the product you're looking to create and the story you're looking to tell about your product. Especially here where brand loyalty is super big. You go, this is a Texas product, from Texas, engineered here, grown here, processed here, never left. And that's a really strong thing to have. And so each state wants that. Wisconsin's the craziest of all of them. They don't want to buy a single product if it's not from Wisconsin. So when we started to do the math, and we looked at one field can hit 2,000 pounds of wet material, for example, that's 400 pounds dry hemp out of that product. And one of the facilities that we're actually going to be this month on the 20th heading out to, that we're finalizing in New Mexico, they've got 750 acres coming in. That's 300,000 pounds. So, even if we spread over 200 days of the year operating, which means we'd have to dry the product effectively and store it so it doesn't mold, then that's 1,500 pounds a day worth of processing if they didn't do better than we thought they would. We'd need more than a weed witch and salad spinners to get that done. We looked at parallel industry. You know, they've already been doing everything we're doing. They've been doing it in stevia, vitamins, fish oil. All of these things have been processed with these processes already in bulk. But ask yourself, do you know any vitamin mines around here where people are physically making? I know everyone's selling it. I got GNC, I go into the local quick stop or the corner store, vitamins everywhere. Every beverage I drink, chock full of vitamins. It's in everything. But we don't make them here. We don't generally make a whole bunch of vitamins here. We leave that to be done overseas, where they have the infrastructure, where they've developed the know-how through practice, and where they've already worked all these theoretical kinks out of their system. Ethanol is a tincture extraction. In fact, the type that's used by Mississippi State and so on is called quick wash ethanol tincture, quite oil in the industry. We didn't need to reinvent the wheel, it already existed. Tincture, stevia, distillation, it had already been around using the same equipment forever. A cannabis or hemp-only machine, it has little resale value. If I show you a cannabis extractor and I try and take that to get financed, it's not farm equipment, it has one customer. So we looked at because I come from finance, I said, well, that's not gonna work for me. A, it's unproven. B, I need something that works industrially, that we have support on from a factory with engineers. And C, I can't R&D 40 products at the same time. So basically, we set up a system that we use. It's been in operation on most of the equipment for over 20 years in refinement and molecular isolation. 3 years ago, we built a pathway and we locked it exclusive with our vendors before the hemp wave even hit. We self-funded with our sales, like I mentioned, and we didn't advertise the entire system because we couldn't risk someone getting ahead of us before every vital vendor was locked in exclusively. We'd been down that road with my partners in eating. People had tried to circumvent them. They messed with them and tried to go out the back of the factory. They'd been betrayed by their vendor, and they'd been circumvented. Now they ended up suing in China and getting their equipment back at half the price they paid for it, but that's only by the grace of how they structured their system and how much of a good bulldog they are at that kind of stuff. But basically, we put the whole chain together. We had to build a repair and supply chain. We had to translate every manual, but in doing so, it meant we could finance as a parallel industry. My liquid-to-liquid filter can depull orange juice, or it can make biofuel. So it doesn't have just one function, it has resale value and equity. So remember that 1,500 pound a day figure? Well, what if they want to take on a contract for another 1,500 pounds from the person down the road who's also growing from that? So this is an arcane knowledge that takes startup cost. Not everyone is going to do full capture. The cost of a 3,000 pound a day lab though, versus a 1,500 pound a day in the actual cost, no matter what the vendors tell you, is minimal. It's very little, especially in ethanol, because all we're really doing, we're not really increasing much of the equipment except the pipes and some metal. That's a stainless steel straight cost. The engineering didn't cost more. Many of the pumps don't need to be much bigger, and they're built scaled for other already existing systems. So to upgrade from 1,500 pounds to 3,000 to 6,000 to 10,000 isn't actually that much more. So dipping your toe in might cost you $1.5 million, depending on what you wanted to do. But going full bore and increasing from 2,400 pounds to 10,000, even potentially 20,000, could run as low as $5 million if you do it right. So when you look at the benefits of that, they're extreme to just scale appropriately and fund correctly when you get started. So we came up with a plan to help everyone that we did business with and to help ourselves. We scale our clients and we cut their starting cost at startup, and we partner to streamline the process so that they get to know what we know off our IP. We realized our competition was charging $5 million, but we could charge $1 million for. And if I cut my profit and I show it to you with comparables that you went out and got, and I show you this is what you save, then I show my value as an equity investor. And you get our IP, and you get our protection. So it's a very helpful system all in all. We thought if we really believe in our system, then we won't make money until our partner makes money. And that's how we operate. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. We're always looking to what's next. For this reason is why we came up with BioSmart Research. We evolved that out of Rainier Distillers and Washington State Enterprises so that we could run our own tolling labs. Then we could develop improved methods for extraction and processing. We could have a place to train the personnel necessary to run the more advanced systems of remediation and equipment, because people got to get trained up and do the on-the-job training. So we also wanted to work with our clients to create white label products. So you'll see up here, I'm going to go off script here for a minute because this is great. This is about 5 years worth of research you're getting right now for free. This is everything you need to do. And I'm going to provide this to all you guys via email. So you'll be able to see it. This is your pathway right here. Some parts in it are a little bit tweaked and you'll have to figure out yourself. I'm probably in the long term going to blur out over here because there's been a lot of changes to that portion. However, if you start at the beginning, you will have to address harvesting your hemp crop. Then you're going to have to address whether you bale it, wrap it, or put it into a trailer. Then you're going to have to look at your storage time for how long you can store it before it molds. So you can actually dry it year-round if you get the right compression baler. Which one is it? Let me tell you. So next up, you have to transport it to the dryer. Then you got to chop it, because you're going to have to chop it up to put it through your dryer and get the product dry, or you're going to have to hang it for anywhere up to over a month. Then you put it through a loading conveyor, and then you put it through our single pass dryer, and then you take your dried material discharge, and you take that on a conveyor to the processing plant, where you inspect the dried material. That's where you pull a sample. At every part of this step, we're pulling samples with our chromatography to test what's in the product and to show it for our GMP compliance and our clients' processing. So when the product comes in and we get a COA, a certificate of analysis, we don't trust it. We do our own and we do another third party. That way we have 3-point verification. When it goes out of the dryer, then I test it again. So I have another verification. When it comes over here into the facility, it's inspected, and then it goes. You guys ever see jewelry get cleaned before? This is super cool. So what we do is we have sonic plates that agitate the ethanol, and it actually pulls the trichomes right off of the plant. So that way, just like when your jewelry gets cleaned, it actually shakes it off the exterior along with the static charge of ethanol. Unlike CO2, ethanol has a distinct advantage. It is both a polar and a bipolar solvent. And when you talk to ethanol people versus CO2 people, they'll explain to you the CO2 folks come in typically about a 75 or 70% efficiency, though some claim 80, which is cool. But with that process, unfortunately, you don't compete with ethanol. Because ethanol is a bipolar and polar solvent because it's got water and solvent in it, it pulls both static charges, then you sonicate it, I can actually make your plant material non-detectable. That means if you send it to a testing lab, they will not be able to tell you that there are cannabinoids in it because they can't find them. And they might come back with a .001 or something like that if they want to get really just throw something in there, but it's not that they can find it or show it to you. So we're testing along the whole process. We put it into our ethanol tanks, we sonicate it, it's cut to a nice grind, and then it goes into the continuous centrifuge. If you're doing a facility over 10,000 pounds and you're putting stuff into bags by hand or with a hopper and then taking those bags and soaking them and putting them into a centrifuge, what are you doing? There's automated systems for that. I have a continuous centrifuge. It goes in as fluid, it spins real fast, and the plant material comes out the bottom and the ethanol comes out the other side. So that way, the ethanol has all your trichomes, it's got everything you want in it, and the plant material gets sent out. So, you don't want to stop there though, because your biomass is going to have about 5% ethanol in it when it comes off that line. Now, whatever solvent you're using or whatever you're doing with your hemp, most places are going to treat it kind of like a hazardous biomass once it gets processed. So you got to think, what am I going to do with all this stuff? You're going to run a 3,000, 10,000, 5,000 pound lab. You're storing it all over your facility soaked in ethanol. It's piling up into the rafters. You're trying to drive it across town illegally, dump it into a field, grind it up, set it on fire, whatever you got to do to try and do something with it. What do? I put it in water. Then I add yeast, I add sugar. I make my solvent out of my hemp. I do that because it's clean and it's cost effective and it's illegal if you don't get a TTB permit. So we do all this process all in one go. We do it from the beginning and build out the idea that we're going to do this, and then you're making your own solvent. You have control of your solvent. If ethanol costs, because everyone's processing with ethanol, jump up to 50, 60, 70 bucks a gallon because they know they got you at the distribution plant, it's okay. You've got closed chain, it's your own product. And no one knows it's cleaner than you because you've been testing it like crazy. So, you get a spiked mash, you pull your ethanol off it at 20%, and guess what? You actually end up with a surplus of ethanol off the system. More solvent comes out than goes in. And a really neat thing happens, and I'm going to share it with everyone. The yeast, it eats all the sugar. So a lot of folks in here know what biochar is? A lot of folks, anyone? All right, so biochar is made from something called dried distillers, grains, and solids. Now, dried distillers, grains, and solids are sugar-free materials that have been run through an ethanol-type processing. So, it has its own actual value. You can even Google it and see what the going rate of PDGS is. Sugar-free, you can burn it up, and you can actually turn it into biochar. And when you look up the studies on it, and you can even just Google it and look at Google Shopping, you'll see 1 cubic foot of it can run up to like 25, 30 bucks if you put the right microbes in it even. So now what have you done? You run through and you run your drying process. And if you've done it right, you've captured terpenes there, which pays for the cost of your drying, and then you end up with 2 sources of revenue. Because you're going to charge for drying, you're going to charge for milling, and you're going to keep the terpenes. It goes through your system, and now you're going to wash it in ethanol. Ethanol that you're now making yourself in your second phase when it comes off. You make that ethanol, now you've got a product that's a bunch of goo. You take that goo, you throw it in your pyrolysis machine, you get biochar at the other end. Now, biochar is the basis for something I'm going to touch on later that you can use to make something called graphene. And that's a real big deal if you all know anything about it. And the back end of this process that's funded by the front end will probably be worth more than any of the cannabinoids that end up coming off of all the extraction we do throughout the country. But anyway, your micelle is going to move into your extractor. That's basically just going to evaporate everything. You're left with a crude oil that then goes into distillate after it's winterized. Then it goes into the HPLC. Let's go ahead and kick it to the next level. So, we realized there was a need for a turnkey solution that would do all of those things that I just showed you. And throughout the last couple of years, we've been building up the connections and infrastructure, expertise, knowledge, personnel, trainers, and even in fact, the people who do our large-scale facility installs are RMH Building Company out of Houston, and they're oil guys who actually make oil relay stations, explosion-proof ones, that are UL certified top to bottom that we can put our equipment in. When I need a big facility installed or a drop-down building, day one, operational, I call those guys. So we actually have people from oil and gas for your electrical, for your zoning, for whatever you need in any state. They know Texas like the back of their hand. So when we get someone going with that, that's where we set them up. And so the client gets full support on the whole system. They get a warranty handled by one vendor. I don't know if you've ever tried to have an HP computer and a Dell printer, and if you called for customer service on those things, and HP says it's Dell, and Dell says it's HP, and then they both say it's Windows, and good luck. So if you've ever had a cannabis or hemp lab, talk to some folks around here that have, it's 10 times worse than that. Because remember that backyard blaster, that's who's running your show typically, not a biochemical engineer. Maybe a chemist is if you're lucky, but chemists are oftentimes theoretical. A biochemical engineer is a working engineer who does these kind of formulations and process daily. That's what you're looking for, and if you guys are looking for them, get Aggies. They're real good at it. So basically, it's true. We provide SOP, full support, and we update your SOP for you. So if we get efficiency that makes you more money, telling you makes me more money. We have a team in every state for ISO 9000 and CGMP and GMP in-house. We have architectural renderings that we provide in-house, licensing assistance. We help you hire the right people, we vet them for you. We help with seed assistance, brokering, equipment stack from harvest to drying, milling, crude, distillate, white labeling, THC-free isolated cannabinoids, and terpenes, flavonoids, and basically formulations for end customers. No one wants to fail. No one wants to make the wrong mistake. And you don't have to go all in all at once. You just have to have your plan for how you're going to execute which portion of the whole thing you're going to do. And you have to make sure you're properly funded. And I'm not saying you even need $1 million. It depends on what you're doing. But you have to make sure that you have enough to operate and you don't start taking shortcuts on your equipment to get to production, because it's only going to end in heartbreak down the road. And it really does cause problems as you move on. So basically, the way that we work with our manufacturers overseas is, a good example, there's not a whole lot of CBD processing in China, no matter what people tell you, on an industrial scale with a bunch of companies. There's a very small subset of folks who work in it over there. And it's been tightened up recently even more. So what we do is, we work with the manufacturers over there. If you saw the little video when the folks were coming in, that was actually an example video of our team over in China working with their HPLC vendor and working with them on how the process works, so that you know how a large-scale production HPLC operates. Basically, think of it this way: if you've ever seen a Plinko machine, or on The Price is Right, it's basically got a tube kind of like that, it's cut in half, and you got these pegs coming off it. And then they take a little thing and they drop it down things between the pegs until it hits the bottom and you get a prize at the bottom, right? But imagine if at the bottom of that thing were your different cannabinoids: CBG, CBN, CBL, Delta 11, THC, all of that, all right down there on the bottom of it. So the size, the molecular weight, and the static charge of the cannabinoid determine in solution how fast each cannabinoid moves through that system. So as it comes down the filtrate material in the column, they start to separate. And if you look up chromatography and food coloring, you'll see they take green food coloring and they drop it through chromatography paper and it separates it back out into blue and yellow. Right? That's what we're doing. We're separating out the blue and yellow. We're taking the cannabinoids we want out and we're leaving the ones we want in, or we're isolating, depending on your system, all the cannabinoids, flavonoids, and terpenes so that you can reassemble it into novel products, which is something we do. We got a dog food coming to market with 6,000 store distribution at Carnivore, the biggest producer of dried, freeze-dried dog food, bigger than Purina had it or anyone else in the country. We wanted to target an industry leader so we could have that kind of capture. We formulated for them their end product. We did every part of the process, and we made it an IP for them, so that they now have a generated IP. For me, I get a little residual payout for putting it all together to them ongoing, that we get paid. I also get paid out by supplying them the CBD, and I get paid by supplying them the terpene blend and flavonoid blend, and the ongoing research and white papers that our technical writers write. So we do full-scale manufacture and production for them, and we give them every step that they need, even down to how to interact with the client, and how to do it legally. You can't make claims with CBD. You can't say, even if you've read it 1,000,000 times, your own doctor told you, and you had a vision of it. You can't go out and put on your product, this is going to cure your back pain, no matter if it will. So what you have to do is you have to put out information that is actually research that your customer can go educate themselves on. And there's ways to do that and ways to phrase it. I'll give you guys a freebie. Think about sleepy time tea. Sleepy time tea doesn't make any claims, but we all know what it does. You take it at night, you chill out, no caffeine, maybe some chamomile, makes you all chill. Well, that's the point of it, but it's not making a medical claim. And so then you can go research chamomile, the contents in it that have that effect. And there's real research behind that. And that's what you have to rely on if you're making an end white label product. And you have to make sure the people that you're selling to as a supply chain do it correctly as well, because they don't know any better. And if you do, then you get that residual formulation product, profit from the product. So that's one of the ways that you can increase your income. I want to do some examples here. Now, I don't want to throw any of my clients under the bus for things that they've experienced and shared with me going through the industry, their pains or pitfalls. And I didn't want to put a picture of anyone up here, so I just put our dog partner up there, and we're going to call him George. So he worked in CO2 and hemp for 2 years in Oregon. He still used ethanol at the end. Here's the funniest thing, guys. 90% of people who use butane or CO2 end up using an ethanol process. After you extract your primary plant material with CO2, it still needs to be decarbed. So watch this. You run it through the system, then you take it through that system. You're getting maybe, this guy paid 750 grand, he got 2 kilos an hour. Now remember, I was talking about having to do 3,000 pounds a day, and he's getting 2 kilos an hour, and the system he paid 750 grand for. Now he was a trailblazer, and this was a couple years ago, but that same system doesn't go for 100 grand less than that right now. Apex Supercritical charged $50,000 and still does for a unit that does 2 kilograms a day. How are you going to conquer hemp with 2 kilograms a day in CO2? It just doesn't scale. So I walked in and I showed him, hey, with everything you have in your lab right here, right now, I'll actually beat your $750,000 machine. And he went, the hell you will, he's Texan. All right, he's from Dallas. So he goes to me, you're not going to beat me. I go, I will, which is let me use your rotary evaporator. I went out to the store, I got an ice cream maker. One of those old school ones like Grandma had, with a little pot, a little wood around it, and I started throwing dry ice in there. And then I used his cryo fridge, and I froze his plant material. Then I went out and got some ethanol, and I poured that ethanol frozen over the plant material. And then I filtered it, and I pressed it, which isn't the best way to do it. It's better to centrifuge it. And then when I was done, I just dumped it in his rotary evaporator. And then it evaporated. And guess what he had? Crude oil. It's great. Had more chlorophyll in it than his CO2 product, but by the time I was done filtering it with simple products that don't cost very much money, it was indistinguishable on the end product of distillate. And that's when he quit. He was a partner with his brother, and he said, get this. And he went and raised the money out of his own pocket, and he went forward and he was able to set up his new facility, which is actually getting running. And if you want to come up and see him do 5 to 7 kilograms of finished distillate per hour, not crude, but distillate, that's what he got. And we got him in for under the price he paid just for that one piece of machinery. So this is where people bottleneck. Crude, to a point, is easy. But there's issues with crude too, which I'll start with. One is filtration. You can't just wash the plant and evaporate it. It's not going to work. When you try and take that into a short path, it's going to have too much wax. It's going to gum it all up. Your oil's going to get weird. It's going to get green. It might turn red. It might destroy all the cannabinoids in it. It might have dirt in it and clay that actually destroys the cannabinoids and polymerizes it. If your filtration's not right, you might even end up with charcoal in your product and get plastic. I had to go down to Medford and ship plastic out of a glass bowl because they polymerized it by not filtering their carbon. So if you're lucky enough to have a good system where the bags don't rip and all those other issues don't happen, then you can get to your distillate. But your first real bottleneck is drying. No matter how arid your climate is or how dry you think it is, hemp can and may mold. And if you throw it in a big pile in a hot summer day out in a field, it can and may catch fire, just like linseed oil rags. So there's issues that you really want to think about when you're doing this. So one of the benefits is to use a dryer. You get same day processing and drying. But the issue we saw in Oregon was people were using these gas-powered dryers. The manifold gets up to 400 degrees or more. And these were made for chili drying over in Asia, typically, most dryers that people use. So hemp has a unique quality, which is all the powder on the plant we're trying to get to. And when it's blown around with a little heat and so on, that can clog up those manifolds. And if you don't have someone up there with a leaf blower standing there blowing on them, then you've got yourself a fire. And it's not great because it's in a particular powder being flown around at high heat. So you get a flash. And then you get your whole building on fire where you're storing all your hemp. And that's how you got 3 terrible fires in Oregon over the last 2 years were from improper dryers, which is why we use an electric heat system. First off, you don't need to run it so hot. And if you ever wonder if electric heat systems work, it's how you have a heater in every building, typically. Either have a boiler or an electric heat exchange HVAC. So we used a system that we engineered similar to an electric heat exchange HVAC, and then we worked out a system to capture the terpenes. Because I don't care whatever anyone tells you about capturing terpenes here. You're losing most of them over here. So the plant, when it's fresh, has the most water content. The plant, when it's fresh and first harvested, has the most aromatic terpenes. That's why when you walk into a drying building, that place smells dank. The reason why, it's all the terps in the air. They're just vaporing off, being wasted. 80% water volume, of which 1 to 2% can be terpenes. And terpenes, when formulated and isolated, can go into a multitude of products, from improving beer, making beer consistent every year. We did that for Argus Brewery out of Chicago. We gave them an IP and a system that allows them to never have a beer different year to year. It doesn't matter how the hops grow, and it's thanks to hemp and its shared terpenes in the system. And that's our process that we came up with to do that. So you get additional money from drying, and you don't hit a bottleneck, and your plant doesn't rot, and you don't run into those problems if you do it correctly. Also, if you avoid gas heating, you're not adding more water to the plant. People don't realize this, when you start a fire and start burning oxygen like that, you're actually having to overcome the moisture that's created. With an electric arid system, you're not running into the same problem. So you can actually dry at about 15 degrees or more lower and get the same effect. So, after you're done drying, you get your crude in. Say you're getting supplied by a third party, right? You're just the processor. You don't have to worry about all this plant stuff or drying or all that other mess. I just want the plant brought to me. It'll all be ground up. It's gonna be great, and I'm gonna be fine. Well, the plant's not always ground. Sometimes it's whole plant. You're gonna need a miller. Just plan for it. Next up, after you get even if you're just taking in crude and you don't want to deal with the plant at all, you say, I'm just gonna go straight to distillate. I don't want to deal with crude. I don't want to deal with millers. I don't want to deal with centrifuges or ethanol. I just want to make distillate. Okay. Well, you get the crude in, but if you don't buy the filtration anyway, that the same crude guys have, then when they give you bad crude, you're now stuck on that product. So you need a test kit to tell wax viscosity. You're going to also need to make sure that you have lenticular filters, liquid-to-liquid gravity filters, and also particulate filters and wax filters, as well as winterization. Those are all necessary to make sure that you can intake crude properly to turn it into distillate. But like I mentioned earlier, even if you get to distillate, you still got problems. Your THC removal. Lots of liters of really nice distillate. It breaks my heart. They're just sitting in freezers, in jars, bags, just sitting there, unmoved. It's not because there's not demand. There's demand everywhere. It's because it's not THC free and it's legal to sell. So, the necessary product to do that is one of 2 options. You can crush it with pentane, get a container, and you can take just the CBD, which, by the way, doesn't have the actual entourage effect people are looking for. You have to have CBL, CBN, the other stuff. You can pull out just THC and still have a perfectly viable product that has a lot of solutions. And you could raise the percentages of what you think will work best, or your consumer does, or the company you're working with, to make sure they target and hit the products that they actually want, people want to buy. And that's really the key. You either need to be teamed up with someone who can remove THC, or you need to bring it in chain yourself. What's that? I'll wrap this up. So I want to tell you a couple more things. I'll move a little quicker here. They told me I had an hour to build, so I was trying to stretch this out for a month. So basically, yeah, what's that?
Q&A.
Oh, do we want to just start Q&A right now?
Finish this and then go into Q&A.
All right, cool. So I want to give you guys another heads up. There's a lot of scammers out there from the cannabis industry. I don't mean that as any disparagement to cannabis. Love cannabis, got it started. But unfortunately, a lot of those unscrupulous folks have issues. Like you meet Alexander. He sent his product to Eastern Oregon, 40 kilos of distillate. He was promised it would be taken into THC free. So the facility, once they took everyone's product, a whole bunch of people all over Oregon, and they talked a good game. Once they brought it all in, there was a fire. Now, it was either through ineptitude or inability to fulfill contracts. I'm not trying to say that's the kind of folks that you'll run into. But I do want you to know that if you don't control your whole chain, if you don't have every step on lock, if you don't have your attorney involved talking to everyone who touches your system, as far as where your chain leads to your end goal, which is your money, if you don't have that down correctly, things like this can happen to you if you don't control all of it. So just understand that you're kind of a little bit at the whims of everyone, if you don't have that situation. So let me go ahead and just bump to the end here. This is some more stuff on ethanol versus CO2. These are the really cool systems that we set up. And then, just 1 second here. And I'll show you my real goal here. Given the room up here, I just want you guys to know I'm here today, and I'm here doing this for one reason. I want to give those heathens in the Northwest a Whataburger, okay? So we get this all funded correctly, we do this whole hemp thing, we make graphene, we change the world, we make a space elevator, super efficient batteries, but in return I want a Whataburger. I want it in Seattle, so that's my main goal. So we can go ahead and have the Q&A now. So there we go. Need me up here still, you guys? Is it just for me? Q&A?
Cool. I've got something to kind of kick off the Q&A. Something that you touched on earlier about GMP certification and 9001 ISO certification. For people that are getting into processing here that are familiar with processing, I've been trying to pound this into people's heads as people start to build out here. Can you elaborate a little bit more on why it's important that we have GMP or EU GMP or CGMP?
Or PGMP for Europe, yeah.
Correct.
So basically, there are systems in place with the US government that I can help you get to that give you the experts that have already been people working for those government agencies. So there's actually a group out there that will help you get a hold of these people. They're not cheap, but for about $500 million or so, you can start going through the process of getting your ISO 9000 together and GMP. That's both of those included. So that your facility can produce a product that's nutraceutical in nature, which means it adheres to standards of production that allow it to be sold as a food type product, as a regulated product. Odds are, as the industry evolves, certain processes will probably be removed and GMP will be scaled up to meet needs through chromatography, either rotary chromatography, which isn't as effective, or HPLC, because those are how you make, say, insulin, is typically purified with an HPLC. And we have plenty of insulin, for the most part, until FAR got into cannabinoids. So, and then there was that insulin shortage. So the same machinery that's used to make clean insulin and drugs is the same machinery used to be implemented. And that machinery actually can go beyond ISO 9000 and beyond GMP as it evolves. We can actually get it to pharmaceutical because we use Clarity tracking software. So you can actually, when the FDA goes for it, use our system and our implemented tools, if you purchase the right stuff, to get to the point where you can actually do pharmaceutical grade processing. So that's all built into our system from the start. So that as it evolves, we build to the highest standard. All you really have to do is just get the right people to certify and stamp it. My presentation isn't online, nor will it likely ever be unless someone here leaks it. But you guys are going to get a mailing list of this a little bit refined. as well as I tried to stick to my script as much as possible so that you guys didn't have to waste your time making a bunch of notes. So that'll be available to people. Thank you very much.
The other thing to that that I wanted to add to what he was saying is GMP is also important too when you start trying to get into international distribution. So that's something everybody needs to take into consideration if you're trying to have a processing facility that tailors not just to national, but international distribution. Does anybody else got any other questions?
Oh yeah, please. I'll take as many as you want. What do you got?
Yeah, I'm an actual producer.
Yeah.
I live here in Texas, but I've got about 1,200 acres in Colorado. What is your opinion on ethanol acetate?
Like as far as like THCO ethyl acetate or?
You know, ethanol acetate, like organic ethanol acetate,
Yeah.
sourced from Europe.
Well, my thoughts are it's cheaper to make ethanol yourself overall for extraction purposes. Are you talking about to use as your extract? Are you going to answer the question?
As your extract and as far as your capacity per day.
I mean, I can do $5 a gallon, and it's perfectly clean, and it pulls all to non-detectable. So for me, I'm not trying to import. They'd have to prove that the polarity was somehow better and markedly better to go through the trouble to do that. And I don't like importing stuff a whole lot, not because I have any problem with it, and obviously I import the equipment, but if anything that we can do here or in the country that we set up in, I want to keep there. Hemp can put money back into the local pocket of people from that area. So if I can make all our systems run off of ethanol we create ourselves.
Yeah, I understand that, but when the American farmer gets a hold of this crop, they're going to bust this market. And the process that they're going to have is process this at the most economical way possible.
Right.
And
So
if you look at the ethanol acetate, or you know, it'll separate with water immediately. And so you get rid of your supercritical stuff, you get rid of all your stuff.
yeah, but where's your water integrate? Where's your decarboxylation?
It comes in whatever.
You're still doing the same process again. You're still dumping it back in it. And it's not actually any different. It's the same processes, just in a different stack. But here's the problem. If you use the different ethanol in your front, I use the same ethanol in my back end to separate the actual cannabis. So there's a benefit to just keeping it all the same ethanol, and it's $5 a gallon to make. What's the cost of this other stuff?
Well, it's all about the recovery.
I get 95% recovery, then 20% service.
What I want the farmers here in the room to understand is the capacity out there for this crop is not there in processing. So if you think that you guys are going to go out and grow 20 or 30,000 acres, the capacity is not there. And I've got 1,200 acres of myself in Colorado, and if you don't have a place to process it, that 1,200 acres is going to take a plant of say 30,000 pounds per day of dry matter. It's going to basically fill it up for 150 days per year. So I just want to make sure that I've been in this business for 3.5 years, and I've seen a lot of pitfalls. And I went to Colorado because that's where I could grow it legally. I'm bringing it back to Texas now, and I just don't want to see the Texas farmers do the same mistakes that I did, because the most important thing is to have a place to go with it. Just like you mentioned, it is very important that's going to be the bottom, is the process. And 2,200 acres doesn't seem like a lot to a lot of us big ag farmers. I mean, that's a very small percentage of my acreage, but processors are not available, they're not up to speed, and unfortunately we bear all the risk. You know, it costs anywhere between $10,000 and $12,000 an acre in my budgets to grow a good CBD crop in Colorado, and there is no safety net there. So it's very important, like you said, to team up with somebody that vertically integrated, that can take your product and go. But I have seen so many just breaks your heart that people are trying to save a family farm and they grow 40 acres and they think it's a silver bullet to bring their equity back on crops they lost before. And they just basically drove the last nail in the coffin. So this is a great industry. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that if you want to plant 1,000 acres, you better think about planting 100 acres. And then start from there, because it's taken us 3 years just to get to 1,200. So,
thank you. Everyone, please give Clayton a round of applause. Thank you very much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, our keynote speaker has arrived for the night. I know that everybody had a ton more questions for Clayton. We're going to have plenty of time to network after this presentation. I promise it's going to be one you're going to want to see. There's just one more person that we're going to bring up before our guest of honor tonight. This gentleman I met a few years ago. In February, I've officially started working for him. He has been a mentor to me. He is doing great things in the cannabis industry. And if you go on Amazon, you can pre-order his book called Cannabis Capital, which he'll tell you more about, which I better get that first pre-order, by the way. Please, ladies and gentlemen, the CEO and founder of Bonaventure Equity, Ross O'Brien, and our guest of honor, Vicente Fox.
Thank you, everybody. Welcome for being here. I'm going to hand over the microphone to our guest of honor here in a moment. He's very intrigued with what's happening in Texas with hemp farming and the opportunity. I just want to say thank you all for coming here. We've had a really exciting year behind us and an exciting year ahead of us. We've launched our cannabis investment fund, Bonaventure Equity. We've closed a transaction last week. President Fox has been gracious enough to join our advisory board. And I completed writing the first book on venture capital for cannabis called Cannabis Capital. And we have a couple of our partners from Entrepreneur Media here who are publishing the book with us today. So it's an exciting time, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to President Fox and for some questions, okay? Thank you again, sir.
Muchas gracias. ¿Conocemos en español? ¿Todo mundo en español? Muy poquito. Come on, Texas. Tex-Mex. I'd like to start thanking, of course, Cannabis Venture Capital, which is a fund that is specialized in the cannabis space.